This video is going to be using the Pink Ink Inkit range, a set of water-based inks which work brilliant for colouring in, but particularly for doing backgrounds. And I'm going to be working with Up Croc and Cereal Chiller. So I've got a palette and I'm just using the pipettes on the top of the ink bottles to decant some of the ink onto the palette. Now I use two techniques. I use the pipettes to go direct onto the paper and also onto the palette. And in this case I'm going to for a background, I'm going to actually add the pigment straight to the paper. But I prepare it first by adding clear water over the whole of the background, almost sort of flooding it in. And I'm using a Bockingford watercolour hot press paper because it gives me lots of working time and spreads the colour beautifully. And I've left a little, about an inch at the bottom with no water. And this inch is where I'm going to use the pipettes to drop the pigment in. So we've got some blue, we're going to add some green and some yellow, and it's the water that's going to create some beautiful background effects when the colours merge together. So you can either do lines or spots and dots, either works. And you could actually apply this with a brush, but I think the intensity of the pigments works so well that actually using the pipettes is the best option. So with the wet water, now if you look and you think that the water is drying, you could add some more clear at this stage. But what we're going to do is now make the bottom join the wet of the top by picking up these pools of ink that I've placed at the bottom. And literally you could just go with one line of water. If you haven't picked enough up, you could go a second time, but I leave this paper to sort of blend and bleed on its own. I don't force dry it or anything, although that is an option. Or you could lift your paper up and let the water run to the top. I have done this. You can get some really good effects, but I personally just want to let it do its own thing. I just think it's a nice surprise. You're never quite sure what you're going to get, but it's just a really lovely result. So we'll just put that to one side for a moment. I'm just going to stamp a couple of well, actually, before I stamp, let's just do some other backgrounds where you literally just put your clear water in a square or a circle. Now you can see I've picked up a little bit of the green, and this is because I rinsed out my brush in the clear water and used it again, and the colour has actually contaminated the water jar. So you need lots of clean jars of water rather than using the contaminated one. But anyway, it shows the example really well. So again, I've applied clear water, and then I'm going to actually drop water from the pipette straight into the little damp areas. This is our Miss Grey, and this is one of my favourite colours because it goes so well with everything. And it sort of goes in like little circles, and they kind of react together. Again, I'll leave it and get some really lovely results. And although this one on the left has got sort of furry edges, that doesn't bother me. I kind of like that. It sort of gives a contemporary look. So coming back to the stamping, this is our boudoir. I love this stamp. It's a frame, and it's going to work so well with our two characters, What's Up Croc and Cereal Chiller. And I'm using VersaFine Clair to stamp it because my inks are water based and this is solvent based, so I know that when I put my inks on it's not going to move any of the ink. I generally use black, but my black had dried out a bit, so I found this sort of random colour in the box, and it's really nice. Give it a good firm press, make sure you get a good impression. I always use a stamping platform with foam feet, but again use your own choice. Oh, just remembered, I forgot to put the Stardust powders in the background. You have to do this while it's wet. You can't do this once it's dry, otherwise the powders don't absorb the water and then they stay powdery. You have to do it on wet. And when this is dried, you'll be able to brush it over with your hand, and the powder will stay where it's meant to stay. So just add your, I mean, here I've used gold, but you can use all your different metallics. In the Stardust range, we've got golds and bronzes and primary colours. They can look really, really effective. You need to obviously tilt the paper to the light to actually see them properly, but I want to leave the wet ink to still blend to the top of the page. So just coming back to my boudoir frame, and on the side I want to use Cereal Chiller, and here I want to show you using the inks straight from the palette. So it's just trying to use the inks in lots of different ways, and getting the most from them, the best value. He's such a cool guy, this sloth. So with the pigments in the palette, I'm going to add a little tiny bit of water into the middle of the palette, and then add some pigment from the little circles into the water. I don't add the water to the ink. I want to use them quite neatly. So add your water, clean water ideally, and then a little bit to it, and you need a tiny bit. They're so intense, you don't need very much. And I'm going ink onto dry paper this time, so it doesn't have to go directly into white. And I'm trying to be quite random. I want a contemporary watercolour effect. You can stick to the lines if you want to. But this is the pigment I'm applying is the background to my frame. I'm actually going to go in once it's dry with some ink straight from the pot, just to define some of the detail. So it's great. It's great for backgrounds. It's great for soft effects, but also really good for doing your details. And if you put too much ink on, you can just add some clear water like this and just sort of drag it out towards the edge, and then the pigment follows that, and you get these lovely sort of pooled effects of pigment. And you would just slowly build up your colour, add more and more, and get more intensity of colour. And if you find that you've added too much, you could actually rinse it, because it's Bockingford and a really good quality paper. You could rinse this under the tap to actually take some of the pigment out, and then carry on. You obviously can't do that if you've got a chalky paper, because that will just disintegrate under the tap. And that's why actually for this sort of technique a good watercolour paper is recommended. So we've added the blue, just little touches of green, and you can add touches of yellow, and as it's drying all these colours will blend together and look very, very soft and subtle. So I've done exactly the same technique, adding the ink from my palette to my stamped frames, and I've actually fussy cut the middles out because I'm going to use the characters to poke through to the front. When I fussy cut, I always use a scalpel rather than scissors. It's something I've just used all my life. And there's a technique for using a scalpel not slipping. Is putting your little pinky finger out onto the surface, and you're kind of using that to steady the cut. And if you cut with your finger, you won't slip. And just cut round your piece, stabilizing your hand. If you don't have it, you've got no security there at all. So that's my top tip. So having fussy cut the centres out, using some backgrounds. Actually, these are historical ones that I've done in the past, and I just want to offer them up behind my frames just to take a look first, to find out which ones I want to choose. I've got pale ones, intense ones, thin ones, fat ones, different colours, and I use these just to see what I want to use behind my frame, or whatever piece I'm working on. If you're doing under the ocean, these sort of colours will look great. Nautical themes, just so beautiful, so intense. This is the example of little squares as I was showing you before. And then of course you can use your little worker stamps to stamp on the top and make little miniature. These make cracking little notelets and cards to gift. And then coming back to our characters, I have pre-painted them. I've cherry-picked these two as my backgrounds to be behind the frames, and these are the ones I'm going to use. But I fussy cut out Cereal Chiller and the Croc, and they're going to sit on top of these two backgrounds. So we're going to offer them up behind. I can use these edges. They can be used for back like a scene or a halo or something for the character that's going to sit on the top. So just all have to be washed out. I quite like these decorative edges. And then you don't have to leave them just as they are. Here I've used some white crayon and some pink crayon. I thought these looked like trees and foliage, so I've added some stems and branches on. Here is a circular one where this is where you can really see those stardust powders doing their thing. But I mean, the colour combinations on here, that orange and that misty grey is just so beautiful with the gold. It sort of looks a bit like planets to me. You can experiment with the ways round it goes, because my Sloth and Croc need some sort of intensity behind just to sort of push them forward. Now here I've shown the Croc with the cake in its hand. I did have a sparkler as well on top of the cake, but I did fussy cut that off. But you don't have to use the cake if it's for another occasion. You could slip the cake behind the frame, and I've just with the scalpel cut around his hand and the inside of his arm because I want that to sit over the top of the frame and his nose, hiding the cake. And then we're going to slip the tail in, also being dimensional 3D. That's going to go to the right. And I used some 3D glue, I think, here to make it really 3D and pop out. And the same with the Cereal Chiller. He's going to look great with this really, really dark sort of plum colour behind. And what I've done is I have also put a little slit by his arm, and that's also going to fit over the top of that frame. So again, being three-dimensional, we'll put a little bit of 3D glue under there. He looks so good in that boudoir frame set. And then we're going to put the sentiment. I quite fancy having like a bit of twine or something hanging from his hand, and maybe a bit of 3D gel glue underneath. And then, it doesn't have to be the Croc. We could put another Cereal Chiller with the right colour on him. He fits well in that one too. So you can mix your characters up. And then Matte and Layer just finishes a card off, doesn't it? It just makes it look really polished and professional. And this one I've done a fussy cut face because I just felt it needed to be a lot lighter. Again, I'll probably pop that on 3D gel glue. So coming to the third piece, again I've got prepared in ahead with this. I pre-coloured it from the palette. I've used the brush from the palette to colour the Croc and then fussy cut out when I'm finished. I've cut the candle off so I can pop the candle on the background as an afterthought, and I've also cut his feet off because I actually want to show him standing in water. I want to give it real dimension, and the water I wanted to actually be not the stamped effect of the water but actually in the water of the background. So this is a piece that I think it's a historical one, and I can look at it portrait or landscape dimensions and see where the Croc looks best. Does it look better from the side or from the top or the bottom? But I've chosen this bit of green because I think it looks a bit like a halo and frames him. And if you want to use a mount just to put around just to see what it could look like, that's always very useful. Use a bigger mount if necessary. and up in the top right hand corner I want to use this beautiful crocodile stencil, just to bring a bit of texture and interest to the top right hand corner. I don't want it covered over the whole lot. I always like to leave white areas, but this is Distress Oxide in the lime, which I think ties in really well with the Inkit colours. I don't take my stencils down, but feel free to. If you're not confident, you can just reposition if necessary, but just keep peeking underneath. Best build up slowly and peek and just check you're not overdoing it, and then just build up slowly, and then when you're happy, you can take it off and carry on with the rest of the project. So let's bring him back in. And he looks great there. I love the stencil, but I want to start contemplating where the water's going to be painted in and the candle. So I've got a little HB pencil, very soft pencil. I'm going to very lightly mark in what I want to be and where. So we're just going to sketch in the candle, and we're going to just put some watermarks around his legs. I'm not going to put all the watermarks in, it's just where the first line's going to go, and then I'm going to work down from there towards the bottom. So I'm going to use my brush and ink from the palette again, just diluted with a little bit of water, very palely, just put in the first registration marks. The pencil lines you can obviously rub out later. Mine are so pale I'll probably just leave them in. And then I'm just introducing more and more pigment to the piece, adding more depth. This also, it not only gives it sort of the detail of the water, but it sort of gives a bit of shade. His body reflecting in the water, which I think looks really nice. And you just keep adding until you're happy. Again, if you think it's too the edges are too hard for you, you can add more water down or add clear water to your brush and then just drag it down so it fades to nothing. And we can, once we've got the registration marks in there, we can take him away and really go to town on these water effects. How much you put in and how little is up to you. Sometimes I think less is more, just a suggestion that something's there. He really looks like he's standing in some water. So with the sentiments, I generally stamp them all out, and then once I've finished the piece, look at the composition, I see which bit I want to go with. So in this case I want a long narrow bit, so You Croc My World is going to go to the bottom, but it's clear, and it's, well, not clear, it's pale, and it's going over a pale background, so I'm just going to add a little bit of ink to it so this bit jumps forward. And again, if you put too intense a colour, add more water to it, or a bit of kitchen towel will take some of this off, but I like it because it matches up with the water effect. That's going to go just the bottom right, leave that to dry. But while I do that's drying, I just want to sort of finish off the edges, and you could do this all the way around, but I sometimes think just one side or two sides is enough. You could use a ruler if you wanted to, if you're not confident of doing it straight. I like to go freehand. It's a handmade card, and so I like the idea that it's not dead accurate. So just little lines, dots, dashes, just to edge that. And I think I'm going to run a little bit along the bottom. Again, use a ruler if you're not comfortable about doing right angles. And I think we're pretty much done. Just a little bit of detail. We'll stick him down with a bit of glue, and I think oh yes, pop the candle in, don't forget the candle. Of course you can put one or two or three or however many candles on to be appropriate, and then finish off. Eventually I'll use a bit of 3D gel glue, but this is where the sentiment's going to finish.